So all of the marathon information is available on our website, caniosbooks.com. Tonight, we're really grateful to have film director Mark Blumberg and one of the cast members, John Cleary, with us to talk about this amazing, extraordinary, and interesting film, The Art of Reading. And we hope you enjoy it and join us in conversation. Back to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Marianne, and thanks everybody for being with us tonight. I just want to mention one or two of the highlights of the Moby-Dick Marathon next weekend. On Friday, we will have at the Old Whalers Church, Harris Yulin performing the Father Mapple's sermon. That's going to be around 2:30 in the afternoon. And then in the evening at the new church on Madison Street, Laurie Anderson will perform the quarterdeck chapter, and that's going to probably be about 8:30 in the evening. But the entire marathon is a journey not to be missed, and we hope you'll join us for many of the different watches. So back in the wintertime, as part of a Facebook Melville group that both Mark and I belong to, I saw a post of his film that he had just completed called The Act of Reading, and was immediately drawn to it because both Marianne and I are educators. And at the bookstore for the past several years, when the idea of the Moby-Dick Marathon is mentioned, people almost sheepishly, not all of them, but many of them admit, gee, I could never get through it. It was too challenging for me. I didn't like this, I didn't like that. And so Mark's film appealed to us because it brings in teachers, it brings in the totality of reading, not just Moby-Dick, but reading as a pursuit. And it just seemed really perfect for us to launch into our marathon. So Mark is with us tonight from Brooklyn. He's a filmmaker, and his prior film includes the award-winning, it may have been award-winning, but I'm not sure about that. Flown is the title, is shown at a number of festivals. And he's also appeared as an actor in the award-winning film Computer Chess. Hopefully later, Vicky Hebert will join us from Austin. She is one of the teacher extraordinaires in the film. She's now a retired high school English teacher, and I believe she considers herself a grammarian at large, as well as an explorer, not unlike Ishmael. Also joining us from Nova Scotia this evening is John Cleary. He is Socrates in the film, also the kayak guide. I believe you're in kayaks or maybe canoes, I'm not sure. But John teaches philosophy right now at Beale University in Bangor, Maine. He is also an actor and a poet. Previously, he worked as an English high school teacher in New Jersey, where he and Mark met. And he was professor of philosophy at Raritan Valley Community College. So I'd like us all to give a welcome to Mark and John, and we'll go right into the questions. We'll have a moderated discussion for about 30 plus minutes, and then you'll be able to ask questions via the interface that you are viewing us from. So first, because some people may be here, Mark, who haven't yet seen the film, and for those, of course, who have, could you briefly describe the film and talk about your motivation for conceiving and then making the film?
Sure. Well, I read Moby-Dick about 15 years after I was supposed to in high school. And I just kind of saw a copy of, one of those collector editions of the book, ones that people use to stock their libraries and don't actually read. So it was actually a quite a nice, a reprint of the Easton edition with the Rockwell Kent illustrations and no footnotes, and a nice heavy book that is like a lap book, like one that you sit in your chair and the book sort of sits on top of you and then you can't move. If your phone rings on the other side of the room, you can't get to it. So it's actually a very good way of reading the book. And I just happened to be at the time of my life, I was 33 at the time. So it was at the exact right age, I think, to fully understand Moby-Dick. And catching on to Melville's nostalgia for his life 10 years before he was writing it, and other, all these emotional aspects that run into writing the book. So I was really caught up in reading it. I really loved it. And by the time I finished the book, I felt like some sort of great weight had lifted up off of my shoulders. And I realized that a lot of it had to do with the fact that that this was one of those books that I didn't read in high school. And I didn't read this book in a class, high school English class, that I actually ended up failing because I didn't know how to take the shortcuts that all my other classmates were taking, the Spark Notes and just skim it, this section and skip this chapter. I didn't know how to do that. Wasn't clever enough. So I'm getting some rain on my end here. But that idea occurred to me that I should interview my high school English teacher, Janet Werner, whose class I failed, and it was such an awkward experience for both of us. And out of that came the idea of doing a sort of a documentary film, belated book report. So kind of an awkward and funny way of going back to look at those issues that I had struggled with in reading Moby-Dick.
So that's interesting. If I could interrupt, did you talked to Janet before the idea of the film really blossomed? Is that correct, or was it in your kernel in your mind?
I initially started fermenting the idea just because I wanted to do some kind of long form piece about Moby-Dick. And I started reaching out to her, but I didn't know how to get to her. I wrote her a letter, and I wrote it by hand, and I realized it looked like a crazy person had written this letter, like, "Oh, I failed your class in 50 years." So then I typed it up, and it was pretty easy to find her address online. But I mailed her a letter. She really sat on it. She thought about contacting me back, and then finally her daughter convinced her that she had to talk to me. So, and the thing is, we had this really fun sit-down interview, and we became quite friendly after that. And she was always interested in how the project was going and everything. And it was kind of a good turnaround for me, because this was the sort of teacher where you still have those dreams of running into them. I was constantly keeping her from ever intersecting with my mom, who would, if they ever communicated about how I was doing in that class, I would be in so much trouble. So, being able to sort of bring those people into the same room together to watch the film at the end was kind of a personal, an accomplishment of some kind for me.
No, that's wonderful, and she's remarkable in the film. Her candidness and her humanity comes across from really the first moments that you interact with her in the film, which is great. Now, before we started tonight, John mentioned that he got a degree in philosophy for children, and I guess I'm wondering, you play Socrates in the film, and you have some very interesting things to say about Moby-Dick, philosophy, and learning. And tell us a little bit about, what philosophy for kids means from your perspective.
Thanks for asking. Well, one of the things I brought to the classroom as a high school teacher is a memory that I had when I was a student in an English class when I went to prep school in New York City, and we were studying a poem. I think it was Longfellow or one of these thick poems. And I thought, and the teacher asked me a question, well, what do you think the line means? And I said, well, I think it means this. And the teacher immediately said, no, you're wrong. It means this. And I remember that when I finally became a teacher, that a better question may have been to me when I was a student was, what makes you think that? Like, what makes you say something like that? Like, if you think that's true, why are you saying that? And that sort of led me to philosophy. Their whole platform there at Montclair, the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children, is a rejection of Piaget's notion that children develop in stages of understanding of how to think in the abstract. They push all of that to one side and say that's not true. Children at a very young age can think in the abstract. They can think philosophically. And as such, they don't need to necessarily learn about philosophers, but that's okay. They can learn how to be encouraged to think philosophically in order to come to philosophy as a subject. So that's what I brought to my classroom when I was an English teacher. And I was lucky enough to have Mark as a student. And I like to think that I have something to do with his transformation to being a kind of quiet, a little introverted person. But I knew there was a spark of creativity and a kind of a wild, imaginative nature to him that was later brought out in his ability to act. And I hope I'm still answering your question.
No.
But long story short is that the idea is what they call the constructivist view of knowledge. And the constructivist view of knowledge is that when students can create knowledge, then the text can complement their creation of how they understand a text with what the teacher adds. So it's sort of a communal understanding in which, through a form of distributive intelligence, everyone's cooperating and understanding what Moby-Dick is about, not just the teacher. It's not just a one-sided delivery-oriented way of teaching. My work is very much influenced by the philosopher Paulo Freire, who you may know, and so that's why philosophy for children influenced me in making my classroom into a place where people can take themselves seriously as thinkers, even at the age of 16.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And, that really segues quite nicely into what Vicki brought to the film. I noticed that she's appearing on our screen now, but Vicki, we're not sure if you can actually hear and speak with us. Can you? And I guess she hasn't been able to connect yet. So when she does, we will go back to her. But for those who did not watch the film, first of all, it's an homage to teachers, which I think is wonderful. And Vicki basically inhabits what John just described as far as having this sort of communal voyage that the teacher and the students take in trying to understand this text, this Moby-Dick text. And part of what, John, you bring to the film is also a discussion about our transition from being an oral society to then the creation of the alphabet and the written aspect, written languages. And I wanted to ask you in particular, and Mark, both of you, I'd like to hear your response. Why do you think the Moby-Dick Marathon has such lasting interest, and what is it about hearing Melville's language read out loud that's so compelling?
Good question. So I have a lot to say about that, but Mark, do you want to say something?
I found myself when I was reading the book, with all of its long sentences that were stopped intermittently with these semicolons and dashes, that I would find if I ever lost the thread of what was happening, I would find myself standing up, pacing around the apartment and reading it out loud to myself. And then I would catch on to what was happening, because there's a very deliberate rhythm to Melville's writing. And I like to think sometimes as these sentences are like the length of the ocean, and the semicolons are like the lapping of waves on the side of the boat. And it kind of breaks up the thinking a little bit, but they're long thoughts, but they're wayward, but they are contiguous. They do bring you to a certain spot at the end. And the reading out loud, especially if you're just sitting there and just listening to it, you don't have to do as much thinking, to understand what's going on. The thought pattern, it makes more sense in the vocal space for some reason. And it's partially because he's very creative with his punctuation, I think.
There's a term.
Sorry, John, I'm just going to pause for a moment and welcome Vicki to joining us. We now see you.
I'm
Vicki,
sorry.
thank you for joining us.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and we
Great.
appreciate you being here. We'll get to you in a moment, but we're talking about hearing Melville out loud. So John, please.
Yeah, it sounds like an academic thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. In philosophy of art, they talk about this term called the intersubjective space between the subject and the object, or the work of art and the subject that's experiencing the work of art. And for me, and that's probably my background as an actor and a musician, is that oral interpretation and delivery is really important. Not so much so because we want to hear the words, which of course we do, and that's why we encourage our people who can read out loud well to encourage their diction to be as good as it can be, but also that in the delivery they inhabit the lines in such a way that they convey the meaning that the audience can understand and hear beyond their own personal interior monologue. So whereas we have the interior monologue when we read Melville's work, when it's read out loud, the intersubjective space is sort of energized between both the object and the subject that's experiencing it. And in that sense, it's like listening to good music. We're taught to learn something from listening to people who can read out loud well. And those are very, very often trained actors, but sometimes not. And that's fine. And that engages us in such a way that it brings us beyond just merely, in my view, in my interpretation of the interior monologue.
It's a great comparison to say that it is like listening to good music. And, you know, the communal aspect of hearing the words read out loud is transformative. We find that time and again. There's just these brilliant sparks that Melville drops into a paragraph or a chapter, and you just you almost catch your breath. But Vicki, let me turn over to you, and if you don't mind, if you could just tell us a little bit about your role in the film first, and how long you've actually taught Moby-Dick to high school students.
The second question is much easier. I've been teaching Moby-Dick to high school students since 1993. And, hi. And I saw my role in the film as trying to be as natural as possible so that Mark saw what normal is. And look how big he's gotten. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I also saw I saw my role in the film is to give an honest presentation of what life in a junior in high school classroom looks like, and how kids react and don't react to the things that we want them to love or just tolerate or learn from. So that's it.
It's a challenging text at any age. And how do you find the students? Are there those who basically can't connect, and how does it fall out then those who embrace it? I mean, we do see in the film, of course, the different reactions.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, maybe some of your experience as a teacher that's most fulfilling in terms of a student connecting with the text.
I think that one of the interesting things that I've seen over the years is that there are those who love it from the beginning. And when Ishmael sets sail, so do they. And then there are those who are very resistant, and generally it follows along the lines of those who are intellectually curious in the first place, are those who are on the ship from the beginning to the end. And the many kids find that at first it's daunting because the language is far elevated from what they're used to having to read for a high school class, and the ideas are far more adult than the concepts of most of their previous readings, which, to be honest, for a great part of them have been coming of age, and so they fit, you know, they're a natural fit. My favorites are the ones who start realizing the depths of things, and just how simple words and not so simple words in some instances uh, work together to build a picture that just completely blows their mind. And since juniors are at that age where the things start becoming more than what's on the surface, they begin to see the layers of meaning and the layers of interpretation that the same words can have, that by the end of it, I'll have a lot who said, I didn't think I would like this book,
Mm.
but I ended up liking this book. And then others who come back to me in a couple of years and say, I didn't read Moby Dick. And I said, yeah, I knew that. And also those who are like, I used Moby Dick on my AP Lit open-ended question because there's just so much there that you can connect to. And it's almost always on the list to use.
Cool.
Did that help?
Oh, yeah. No, I think that you are a wonderful teacher, and Mark's film captured that remarkably well. I mean, how was the camera in the classroom? Did it take a while for the kids to kind of just adjust to it, or how did that all interact? And you can both respond to that.
Some kids I don't think ever got used to it. And some kids it became almost immediately not there. Mark,
How long were you there with the camera, or was the camera person there?
We were there for the whole 6-week run of Moby Dick, from Halloween to hello. This is the other product of the film, by the way. This little boy was born on Herman Melville's birthday in 2018.
Oh, wow.
happy birthday.
Wow. Yes.
So it was his birthday on August 1st. How old are you now? 3 years old.
Wow. Happy belated birthday.
And he knows all about Moby Dick. Moby Dick is a big, big whale, right? It's past his bedtime and there's a thunderstorm outside. So
Bless your hearts.
Well, you should know about the Cozy Classic if you don't already. It's you probably have several copies in each room, right?
we have that was actually a cut scene was when I told Vicki that we were expecting a baby. She said, well, let me be the first one to give your baby a book. And she gave me, because everyone gives her, because she's like the only one in Austin ISD teaching Moby Dick. Everyone would always give her Moby Dick themed gifts. So she had a surplus. She handed me her Cozy Classics. And then we also were given the paper cutout Moby Dick edition where all those pieces got destroyed because he was an infant. So now I think he'd be a lot better at it. But to answer your question, I have this very gifted cinematographer, Caleb Kuntz, who's is very affable and puts everyone at ease. He doesn't wear shoes, and it's always kinds of, it gives somebody that, besides the camera, there's something else to point and think and talk about. So when people are distracted, we're capturing actual moments. And I think it was just because we were so regular about coming back, at least the loudest people in the room got used to us.
I think some of the quieter ones did too.
Yeah. Yeah, and we would visit the kids. Some of the kids we would go and visit them at home. They say like, hey, let's just shoot some footage of you doing homework. And inevitably those would turn into little vignettes that we would edit and try out in the film and then remove because it didn't have anything to do with anything. But we kind of got to know the kids a little bit through sort of working with them on these little creative side vignettes, and the ones that made it in are the most dramatic ones, like breaking your neck because you hate Moby-Dick. And yeah.
Sorry.
Important to note that kid, Calvin, actually ended up really loving the book.
Yeah.
But he didn't like it when he was reading it.
By the end of it, he was like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think you were remarkably successful in bringing the camera into the classroom and within the film, giving a sense of completion of the journey from, start to finish, and with some really significant points about some of the students and their relationship to the text. And Vicki also brings out in the film the fact that, their life is happening while they're reading this book. And, good teachers always have to be cognizant of that. And, Vicki, you say something toward the end of the film that really struck me, and it's about why it's so important for you to teach Moby-Dick. And that is because you want to help your students become, smart about the world so they don't get eaten up. And I'd love you to expand upon that, from where that comes from and what you've seen, if you could, please.
I also have a degree in government and have read a lot of history. And it seems to me that when there is an Ahab character in history, the warning signs are all there and people don't seem to see them. And so that's what I meant. I really want them to say, oh, okay, this guy's a megalomaniac and he's all in it for himself and we're all going to go down, so that they can avoid those kinds of people in those kinds of situations, whether they're on a global level or in their own workplaces.
Interesting.
That's fascinating. And I know one of the students makes a comment about how we can all be like Ahabs, but Ahabs can exist in all different aspects of our life. And that's one thing the book may help us be more smarter about being aware of. So, John, there is the linguist or the reading expert in the film, Marianne Wolf, who wrote the book Proust and the Squid. And she talks about how humans were never born to read, that reading is an unnatural act. And then she follows up by saying that reading sort of rewires the circuits in our brain so that it actually changes who we are by reading. And thinking about you as a philosophy professor, I mean, how do you react to her part of the film and what she brought to the act of reading?
I have to watch it again to give a more specific response that would be fair to her explanation. But if I recall what her explanation was, that there's a relationship between sign and symbol and the experience of what it means to read and to to take from the reading experience as something that you develop into your cognitive development, but also into your character, into your personality and who your character is. And so I'm very sympathetic with that. The other part of that, though, that is the rascal in me wants to assert that words are also just exclamations. They're utterances, but that's okay. Even the words are just utterances. The act of assigning meaning to a word is one in which it's a creative act. And once we've done that, then we own it. in a sense. And let me give you an example of that. The if I were to write a poem about a hurricane and to describe how terrible the hurricane was, and then all of a sudden I said the name of the poem is Hurricane Sandy, all of a sudden I've captured my audience's attention by giving it a name such as that. And I think that like reading good novels such as Moby-Dick, it's one in which we accept the denotation and connotation of those words that we're being asked to accept and to take on for ourselves as something that is something that Melville is asking us to take on, but also something that becomes part of us. And what did John Dewey say? A poem becomes new every time it's read, right? And so every time Moby-Dick is read out loud and read silently, it becomes a new novel. And if I understand her correctly, that's the relationship between the linguistic experience of the interpretations of the lines that we read and the ways in which we integrate the meaning of those words into our own character and personalities and a vision of reality and our life worlds. So that's why we put poems on our refrigerators and things like that. Or this is why we hand people cards that have poems in them, or this sort of thing. Because the power of the lines, as some would say, the power of the lines is not only in our ability to interpret what the author may have meant, but where it will take us. Eugene O'Neill, the playwright who you may know, he used to sit at rehearsals for his own shows and say, "That's not who Jamie is, and that's wrong what you're doing there." But of course, that's kind of course, the Moby-Dick has its own life. Of course it does, beyond after Melville's death, and so does O'Neill's plays. And that's what makes it kind of fun and interesting and creative and playful.
No, that's terrific. I mean, great art opens to each individual an avenue of interpretation that is unique to them, and there are as many as there are people, and each person can interpret that differently at different stages in their own life. I'm wondering how many times have each of you read Moby-Dick, or not an actual number, but a ballpark? 1, 3, 20.
30.
Wow, 30. Okay.
It's hard for me to answer accurately because I read it straight through the one time. And then the whole process of making the film was like living within the novel, where I was reading and rereading each chapter that was significant to me, because originally the structure of the film was tied one-to-one specifically to the chapters of the book. I even had chapter title cards in between segments of the film. I was thinking of it as a sort of adaptation and translating the themes of the novel into a documentary form. So I was sort of in the book for a while. So it was one read through solid and cover to cover, and then one really long, obsessive, going through retreading. It was quite involved, that second reading. The second reading was the one that took 2 years. So.
Oh, I'm sure. And plus you were at the marathon, so you of course then read along with the marathon. Yeah. At least you were there once. I just want to underscore what John had to say about really the poetry of the importance of poetry, and the fact that there is so much poetry in Melville's prose. Truly astonishing. But Mark, I want to bring it back to the whole idea of language. And the film is personal, and you have a lot of segments in the film with your brother, who is dyslexic, and he actively kind of deflects your encouragement to read Moby-Dick. At one point he says he's not willing to enter into a relationship with Melville by reading the text. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about your relationship, and if the relationship changed during the filmmaking process.
It did change during the filmmaking process. We were not the kind of brothers that open up to each other and talk about our emotions or anything like that. So it was really surprising to me that we had these conversations. He wasn't supposed to be a big character in the film. It was going to be a little segment, and the fact that he was dyslexic sort of just came out. We always kind of joked about it, but we never talked about it that seriously. So really, even though it looks kind of staged, because the shots are composed and we're on a tripod and in front of scenic parts of San Francisco, the moment when he tells me that he's dyslexic, and my reaction to that is genuine. I'm like, what? It's going, as though that's really the first time he actually said it to me like that. But for some reason, the fact that we have a cameraman, we have these lavalier microphones, these wireless microphones, and just the simple act of having the camera go on these scenes that were just supposed to be a montage of Chris and me reading in different spots. But somehow we would just start talking, and then these scenes kind of evolved out of just this discussion. And Caleb on the camera, without talking to us or without me communicating him, was smart enough to figure out that, okay, something's happening here, and he had to kind of jump in and start getting angles and stuff like that. So really that all happened very organically just because of the filmmaking process. There's just something about the awkward silences of having a camera on you that make you fill them up with speech. And that's a good way of getting a reticent man to talk. And so, I always looked up to him. He's always the cool older brother, even though he had his own kind of wayward path through life. And but he's now very successful as a psychiatric nurse in San Francisco, because there's lots of crazy people for him to deal with there. And he doesn't like to read, and it's partially because he grew up in a school system that didn't know how to handle dyslexia at all. Just like Marianne said, he was just sort of shuffled from one classroom to the next at a certain point of his life. He did eventually go to, in high school, he went to a smaller school that was better for him. And he ended up in the design. He went to Parsons for design, actually. So he's not, he was able to pick himself up at some point, but he did spend most of his middle school and high school years kind of trying, not fully engaged with the school system, and definitely not with reading. So when it came to including him in the film, and knowing that he was so sharp and funny, and had all these keen observations, he ended up articulating a very good point against reading in a way. He says, why do I need Melville's version of the water? I have my own version of the water. And that kind of touches upon what John was saying before, and how the meaning isn't necessarily contained in the text. It's like not owned only by Melville. Like, you can go out and you can have an artistic experience or a creative experience on your own through a direct relationship with nature, which is what my brother does. Of course, it's different than reading a big book like Moby-Dick, and there's other great things you get out of Moby-Dick. But it's interesting, there's no antagonist in a film about reading Moby-Dick, except for it's internal or something like that. But then here, my brother showed up and he had this very coherent argument for just don't do it. Just, it's too late for you. Just appreciate life for what it is. Don't try to go back and fix all these things. And I thought it just fit the film perfectly. And then, of course, we showed the film at the end, and he had this, kind of argument against the film, which again sort of solidified his place in it. So.
Yeah, he had the last word, I think. Is that, if I'm not mistaken, or
you don't need 2 hours of that? Yeah, so he has the last word.
Leave it to family.
Yeah, well, they'd watched the 2.5 hour long rough cut of the film that didn't have an ending. So to him, it was like basically, meaningless. Eventually, when I explained to him, how it all happened, he was like, "Oh, I get it. We watched the Schindler's List version," and then and then it's like, "Okay, yeah," and it got much shorter and more cohesive, I think.
That's funny. No, it's good to have you incorporate many different aspects of relating to or not relating to Melville and reading and Moby Dick. And one thing that you bring in that we particularly liked was your interviews with Melville's, I guess, great-great-grandson, Peter. And you visited him in Arrowhead, you saw him at the marathon. And I'm just wondering how your experiences of being in community with him maybe changed your own appreciation of Herman Melville.
Well, I met him at the New Bedford Whaling Museum because he read the Call Me Ishmael chapter. And I just kind of saw him hanging out in the lobby, and that scene that's in the film is really our first meeting. It wasn't like set up. It was really just, we were at the marathon to try to meet Moby Dick people, and here was the most Moby Dickish person of them all. He read the first chapter. So a beautiful, beautiful man, beautiful soul, and like really one of those people that you can really say that when you meet him. We immediately ended up in this conversation that was just incredibly deep. He's an incredibly present person. And he was really caught up in the biggest questions, the biggest existential questions that we all deal with. And he was ready to talk about it right away. I probably sent out a couple little cues about where I wanted the conversation to go. I think I mentioned something about Rilke or something, and he picked up on that. And then he was like, okay, let's go there. And he talked about the biggest question for the film, which is this "who am I" question.
Right.
And it ended up being the principal theme of the film, because it's the film ends up treating reading not as trying to find meaning in Moby Dick necessarily, but how do you find meaning for yourself in life, in anything. Reading is that word too. It's also, to read tea leaves. You could read your palm or something like that. It's trying to like come up with a meaningful relationship to the world. So it's like it kind of became a coming of age story for myself. And he's the first person who just said that, just right there in that first interview, who am I really? Like, who am I really without all these attachments that I have in my life? He was already questioning the fact that I was interviewing him as a Melville relative. It's like, well, I have that, but I'm also these other things, So then we had this great talk. I was really feeling enthusiastic about the film because I was like, I finally, I was probably on some superficial level looking for kooky Melville people, but without trying to, distance myself too much from them. I also wanted to make fun of the film making itself. But instead, I found what I was actually looking for. What I didn't know what I was looking for is other people who could recognize in me this sort of bigger thing about finding meaning in Moby Dick. There's something much more moving and much more profound than I had given myself even credit for in reading Moby Dick. There's something really big going on when you're reading it. And he was the first person I met and talked to that was telling me, yes, there is something big going on when you read Moby Dick. And that was very exciting for me. So he agreed to come back and film some more at the Arrowhead Museum. And right now, my son, who knows we're talking about reading, is pretending to read.
Lovely.
He's imitating me when I'm reading a little bit. He's getting good at recognizing letters, but right now he's putting on a show, so quietly muttering to himself. So it became very natural for me to use him as a sort of Melville stand-in, and because he had this playful persona, I knew that he would kind of go along with it, and so he kind of conjured up Melville's ghost. We interviewed him as Herman Melville, and then we selected certain things he said to resonate at that part of the film. And he passed away earlier this year in February. It was a big shock to me. Never really talked about being sick. He always preferred to talk about, you know, Buddhism and reincarnation and the sort of everlasting nature of spirit and stuff like that. And so it was really meaningful to me that I was able to meet such great people in this film and kind of get on a boat together and try to figure this out. He was there also for the bicentennial screening at the Arrowhead Museum, which was really special. And John, you were there for that too, and you got to meet him.
I'm so sorry to hear that he's passed. We did meet him at a few marathons in New Bedford that Marianne and I both attended, and he was a remarkable person. So blessings on Peter. You know, one of the things that you bring out in that visit to Arrowhead, I believe, is, you know, the Melville's own journey in terms of writing a book about chasing a whale, and then his meeting and friendship with Hawthorne that caused him to, you know, dive much deeper and to create, you know, the masterpiece that we now know as Moby-Dick. And I'm just wondering if any of you want to talk about that process of, you know, having a creative project, completing it to one point, and then having something in your life occur like this friendship, and then really having that initial version be just blown open and something much more meaningful arise from it. I don't know if any of you wish to dive into that, but if so, please do.
Well, we pay homage to that in the film by making the film makes a very noted tonal redirection. When my wife says she wants to have a baby, because that's a theme that hasn't been introduced yet at that point of the film. It sort of doesn't feel like it's that related to Melville, and it's just sort of like, oh, what? And because that conversation is so serious, it sort of questions my relationship to the film as a character in the film. It questions it sort of puts a ticking clock on the project that you're not expecting. So that scene very much was a part of the process of making the film, in that it was really what was going on in terms of, you know, to the degree that it's a documentary about me finding meaning in my life. That was a big part of it. So the way I decided to include that was by doing it on Monument Mountain, where Melville and Hawthorne met. So that was a direct homage to, okay, well, you think it's going to be this adventure story. Well, now it's going to turn into this other thing, this thing about meaning in general, which, you know, if you're familiar with Melville and you like the open-ended structure of the feeling of his books, then you'll go along with this move in the documentary. I think plenty of people don't, and they have good reason to. Feels sort of like, wow, it's sort of, I was expecting to learn about Moby-Dick, not about this dude's marriage, you know. So, but if not for that scene, you know, we probably wouldn't have had this guy. So.
Remarkable. And actually, people who have seen the film have noted that they've been there, they've been at that spot. So they've said that to me, just for what it's worth. So I don't know if either of you want to tackle that question, and if not, we can go to see if there's any questions that have come forward from the audience while we've been chatting.
So my story has nothing to do with Melville, but in a way it does. And so one of the reasons why I live here in Nova Scotia, in addition to Maine, is because of the music of Stan Rogers, who you may be familiar with. And so I was supposed to play at the folk festival here in the summer of 2017. But as you remember, there was a hurricane that came up the coast. And so I've sort of been enamored with his music over the years, and I play a lot of his music. I sing a lot of his music. In fact, my whole repertoire is Stan Rogers and Gordon Lightfoot, so it's pretty limited. But one of the reasons why I'm here is for that romantic impulse of being connected to sea shanties and to sea stories and to folk songs about the sea, which I sing about. And now where I live now here in Guysborough County is much of what he sang about is right where I live now. And so it's a completely romantic, small r to think that way. But like a lot of people devoted to moving to a place, once they read enough or experience enough about a particular artist, they move to that geographical location. That's what I did. And it's crazy, but there are no kitchen parties here. It's just because of, and you know why, because I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. That's great. In fact, if you have a website where your music is available, let us know or tell us all right now.
I'm too shy to have a website, so I don't. I play for Mark and I play for my family, but that's a really good idea to have a website for what I sing about. But if you'd like to see my latest performance, this is a shameless self-promotion. You can type in the Growing Stage Theater of New Jersey and type in the Christmas Carol. So I just did 38 performances of the musical version of A Christmas Carol in which I played Scrooge.
Okay.
Wow.
So there's a review there. I'm interviewed by the New Jersey Council. I forget who they're called. No, I forget who they're called, but it's a nice little clip. It'll take you a minute to look at. And that was a lot of fun doing that.
Great. We will definitely go there and check that out. And mentioning shanties, I'll put out there that after our marathon is over, we have a big after party near the bookstore, and we will have some folks singing sea shanties at that.
Oh, great.
Can't do a marathon without having some aspect of sea shanties. We will have a choral group singing the dirge during the sermon earlier on the trip. But Mark, are there any questions out there that we can put forward?
Yeah, our first question here is from Thomas M. Sutton. He asks, how did Mark find Vicki? And this is not the most interesting answer. I emailed, I was just thinking, how am I going to find somebody who's teaching Moby-Dick? And I emailed Austin ISD's, help me out
English
here.
department. It's the downtown English department.
It was literally the coordinator of the syllabi, or what is it? The
people downtown who set the syllabi for what we're supposed to teach.
So this person emailed me and
but that's
said,
okay.
and I forget this gentleman's name, but he said,
former guy that I used to teach with.
A guy I used to teach with. He said, you have to talk to Vicky Hebert. And, in terms of, not just because she's the only one, but she is the Moby-Dick teacher. And when you go into her classroom, it's just Moby-Dick on every wall. It's just, she was the Moby-Dick teacher, and I found her. And when I always say that when I met her, I was just so charmed because she was sort of in a costume. I wasn't expecting to meet somebody who looked so much like Carrie Fisher from Star Wars. I was like really, and were you wearing an outfit that day? No, when we visited the school, you were wearing a Minnie Mouse outfit.
Yeah.
When we visited the school. And
it was like Disney Day.
It's Disney Day, yeah. And she wears the best outfits. Everything's always coordinated. And it was just, the film was always going to have a theatrical bent to it. So Vicki felt like she belonged. And her classroom was a magical space. And that's something that we talked a little bit about in terms of thinking about how, what we've lost in the pandemic for teachers. And a big part of Vicki and how she operates, so sorry, he's destroying this post-it pad here, is that she creates this space for students to enter into and feel at home in. She had this snack counter, you could talk about this, but she has all these little things she does to make the space feel like a home for the kids. And it makes them very relaxed, and makes them more spontaneous. And I just knew we were in the right in the right spot there. So Finding Vicky
We
was
just liked the
easy.
color, Mark.
It was easy. It was easy. Everything about Finding Vicky and working with her was just intuitive. So we have a question for Vicky from Judy Moran. How often did you have students read excerpts as a close reading exercise?
Not enough. That's, thank you for, I should have more, but not nearly enough. I did reading to them, but I've always told my students that if you're not getting something, read it out loud to yourself, because reading really is an auditory activity. It's not really as visual as we think of it. But there were, when kids were having trouble taking something apart, my go-to for them was, have you read it out loud to yourself? Have you read it out loud? Did you read it to each other? And so, does that answer? Not nearly enough, but it was the go-to when there was problems.
Let me interject along with that line, Vicki. Over the course of your career, how did your teaching of the book change a lot, or how did it change?
The first times I taught it, it was very abbreviated. The longer I taught it, the longer their reading assignments got. Because I taught it in the context of an advanced placement class, that the expectation is there that you read the text and you look for all of the devices that he's using to communicate, and how that, not just how the writing impacts us, but why it impacts us, and what has the writer put into this work that causes us to go the places that we go. And I created more and more opportunities, or I like to think of them as opportunities. I'm sure some of my students thought of them as something less than opportunistic, but asking them, hey, take this much of it, and just take it down to the ground, find out how he did it, and why, and figure out why he did what he did here, and how that affects what we get out of it. With more and more opportunities to actually take the text apart as I included more and more text.
Great. Yeah, you challenge the students and they step forward, it seems.
Well, sometimes.
I may have mentioned this in the last Zoom call, but I always feel like mentioning it. It was really amazing to watch Vicky at work, taking the students through a line-by-line reading of one of Ahab's monologues and really exploding every line to figure out all the different shades of meaning that were going on, and having her own philosophy lesson along the way, because some of those speeches are so incredibly, I mean, the conversations could go in any number of directions in terms of what they could possibly signify. But Vicky always did such an incredible job of getting the kids to latch on to the biggest interpretation, the widest interpretation, the one that kind of touches upon the history of Western thought kind of interpretation. And it's amazing because you know that it's like, you know, maybe 60% have read up to that point, but everyone, including the ones who haven't read a page, are fully involved in these conversations around this one monologue. And that was always amazing to watch, because you could see how Moby-Dick can be, and just like many big texts like Moby-Dick, can be exploded from just one chapter. You know, you can take one chapter Moby-Dick, and with a good teacher like Vicki, you could really kind of, I would have to say great teacher actually, because a good teacher could get you some plot and some meaning, but this was really something else to see. And even, you know, we had a great shot of Cooper, the you know, the one who led the mutiny, through one of Vicky's,
playing college football now. Yes.
yeah. He was so blown away by one of Vicky's speeches that he just went. And we had this shot and we didn't know when he was. He was it was one of the ones about not needing to personify God. That was really something that class. I wish the film needed that scene, because that was incredible. The personified, I forget the quote. Impersonal.
The personified impersonal.
Personified impersonal. And let me tell you,
in the presence of the personified impersonal, a person stands here.
A person stands here. I was like, I remember when you said that, and I was like, I was shocked. I was so, everyone was so emotionally present when you said that, when you explained like all of the ramifications of what that could mean. A person stands here. A really beautiful moment in that classroom. Everyone was quiet. It was one of those moments where the teacher just knows. And I'm sure you knew you're like, okay, this is my mind-blowing part of the class.
Oh boy, I get to blow their minds today. Yeah.
Well, listen, you should put that up on YouTube as a takeout or an outtake rather, and in terms of encouraging people to watch the film. But it's clear in watching the film that Vicki is an extraordinary and exceptional teacher. And
you're very kind.
You know, I think I don't always know what I see, but in this case, I think I'm right. And teachers just play such an important role in our lives, you know, for the two of you know, John as a teacher as well. It's really, that they really are the little guardian angels who shepherd us forward in their best, at their best. So Mark, I'm wondering, we've sort of crossed the hour mark. Are there other questions that our audience has? And if so, let's maybe get to them and see if not, we can move forward.
That's all I see here were the two questions from Thomas and Judy.
Great. So just as a way of rounding it up, we've sort of touched on this, but maybe each of you could say, like, in your own heart and mind, why you think we as a culture keep going back to Moby-Dick generation after generation.
I'm going to go first. I'll go first. I really think that we are always going to return to the works that address the ultimate question, which is, what is it to be a human being, and why am I important in this universe? And we're blessed with a plethora of works that address that central issue. But I think the other reason we keep coming back to Moby-Dick, besides just the sheer lusciousness, is that a word? The lushness of Melville's language and his imagery, and how incredibly well written this book is, as far as just the artistry, maybe not in coherence, but in artistry, it's hard to touch. I think that those things put together make it a book that will last forever, yes, as long as human beings are reading.
Thank you. Thank you. John? Oh, you,
When I think of Moby Dick, I think of all of the things that I enjoy in the grand master narratives that are in not only the Western canon, but the Eastern canon. And like reading Don Quixote or the Bible or the Quran and these other works, their philosophical undulations are ones in which not only do I experience what happens through vicarious experience, what the protagonist is asking me to consider as they go through their experiences, but on further reflection of their reflections about their experiences, I go through my reflections of those experiences. And so it's like a bit like talking about a vanishing point or a hall of mirrors. And but to answer your question, there's always a lot of depth. That's probably understatement. A lot of depth and abundance in Moby Dick, in the same way that we talk about, in my view, Shakespeare's Hamlet, where there's many things going on at once. In a sense, it's a kind of a play within a play. The play being since all of us are the unreliable narrator of our own experiences, when we read about the experiences of other people, especially Ishmael and others, I especially enjoy the character Starbuck. He's my favorite. The scene where he's smiling when they're in a situation in complete danger and he's smiling, that's, I don't know why I like that scene so much, but is one in which by looking into the abyss of philosophical meaning, as Nietzsche says, the abyss looks into us. As we look into the abyss looks into us. And through the creative act of reading Moby Dick, we both allow ourselves to grow as individuals and as human beings better able to deal with life's vicissitudes.
well said. Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Mark?
What's new?
Well, my son here is asking me about what all these different cards mean. And he's already struggling with the main question of Moby Dick is just to how to parse out meaning in all these different symbols. All these symbols we're surrounded with, the tattoos on Queequeg's body, the scribblings on Queequeg's coffin, the doubloon that's nailed to the mast. It's so many symbols in Moby Dick that we're being invited to decode. Yes, cheese, say cheese. Then you got shy when the camera's on it. So this willingness to embrace large themes and the exuberance of spirit that he had in writing it kind of made it one of those also, I think, genuinely American works. And to me, it's that kind of autopedantic exuberance that you could see in a movie like Citizen Kane or in the works of Walt Whitman. There's a sort of freedom in the kind of ignorance that these men brought to their sort of bipolar creations. And it can be a bit much. I mean, I could definitely understand somebody who would not want to watch Citizen Kane or read Moby Dick or Leaves of Grass. I can understand that person very well. Somebody who would prefer Emily Dickinson, I think, but there's something to that kind of freedom of spirit that he brought to these large themes that never went anywhere because he thought very deeply about what America was at a time that it was changing a lot. He thought a lot about what it meant to be as has been said before, a good person in this kind of society or on this ship. What does it mean to be a good leader in this kind of situation? He thought about all of those things, and he brought all of his energy into those questions and into a love of prose. So you can read it any number of ways. You can be drunk on the poetry of the words he's putting in there and just kind of enjoy it just for its sheer aesthetics, or you can engage with it philosophically and think like, oh, well, he's a neo-Platonist, proto-modernist thinker. You can engage with it on many, many different levels, which is why I think it's not going anywhere.
Great. Well, listen, this has been a fascinating conversation. We really enjoy having all of you with us tonight to sort of open up the film, the book, the act of reading. I want to encourage everybody who's watching us this evening, if you haven't yet watched it because you've just joined us, please do. I think you have a couple more days to watch it on this particular link that was put together for the program, and share and tell your friends to go on. It's available online, right, Laura? People can go, and for a modest fee they can watch it. So we want to spread the word about it, right?
Yeah, it's available for free until Friday. And then after that, you can still find it on Amazon and iTunes and anywhere you can rent a VOD movie. So.
Great. We definitely want to support the creative energy of Mark and also the valuable contribution that John and Vicki and the others brought to the film. And of course, we also want you to bring that same enthusiastic energy that Mark just talked about, that Melville put on the pages of Moby-Dick, to our marathon on September 10th through 12th. So we hope that those of you out there will be able to join us. The actual, we move it around the village. It's at 6 locations, and the schedule is on our website, along with how you can support our not-for-profit, because this is actually a fundraiser for Canio's Cultural Cafe, our nonprofit. So Marianne, are you any other last thoughts regarding this evening or the marathon to share?
My screen just froze. Who are you addressing?
I'm asking if you have any other thoughts or to share about tonight.
I'm so delighted that we could share this time together. Catherine and I were just really touched by the film and the idea of being able to meet you, Mark, and cast members John and Vicki. You're kind of our heroes in a way, out there evangelizing about Melville and Moby-Dick. It's such an unusual and delightful and rich film. And tonight, I just feel so grateful for the further contributions that you've made, and thereby will have enriched our own efforts to run our marathon just 9 days from now. I wish you could come out and join us, but anyway, just full of gratitude for all the work you've done on the film and all the work all of you do every day in your different ways. So thank you so much, and please come and visit us in Sag Harbor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Will do.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate you.
And you. We'll
Likewise.
be in touch, and fair winds with the storm this evening.
Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
Smooth sailing.
Smooth
See you,
sailing.
everyone.
This
Thank
was
you.
great. Really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Good night.